Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Marcelo. So today is our third episode of Series 3. So Marcelo is here and I'm here, so I'll be presenting today. So we went through two topics. So in the last 2 weeks, we've had two. So last week, Marcelo talked about Archicad and Twinmotion. And then the week before that, I went through 3D styles. Both of these videos are now on our YouTube channel. So today I'm going to go through customizing the work environments. And next week we have special guests. So we have Kiwa from Ezra Architects who will be presenting. So I'm looking forward to this one. Not just because I don't have to talk, but I think it'll be really interesting. So make sure that you're signed up so you kind of get notified of this one for next week. So today I'm going to go through how to customize your Archicad work environment. So not necessarily how to make your plans better, but how you can modify some settings in Archicad to kind of get more efficiency out of the interface and to kind of customize it to your working style. So, I'll switch over to Archicad now. Okay, so I'm using Archicad 24, and actually Archicad 24 has a whole bunch of new work environment settings. So I'll just quickly show what the new ones we've got. So if we go into options, work environment, and apply profile. So previously we had, I think, standard. Actually, I forget now because I tended to always use the standard, but we only had like 2 or 3. So now that the
standard,
MAP,
I think it was standard visualization or rendering and layouting, something like that. Yeah.
So now it's based on discipline. So now that Archicad 24 has a lot more functionality, like MAPs built in and new structural analysis kind of elements and work, that we now have discipline based. So we have 2 for architectural, 2 for MEP, and 2 for structural. So 2 purely because of a simplified version and a more complex version. So I think the default one out of the box for 24 is the architectural profile 24. So this one. It will look pretty similar to previous. Maybe the only changes is things like the navigator is now docked by default. Previously that was not docked, but pretty much that was the first thing most people did, was dock the navigator. And also that the toolbox here had the name. So it was good for beginners, but I think for most people, you don't need to see the names.
Yeah.
So just a couple of changes, and I think new items in the toolbars up here as well.
Yeah. One thing is, I think we can go back a little bit and explain that basically the work environment is how you organize your palettes and all your windows in your screen. So if you migrate from another software and you used to see, let's say, the navigator on the left side and the toolbar on the right, or the toolbar on top, all this can be customized. It's just good to have it, as standard as it is out of the box, because in case you have to end up going to another machine, in your office or you work in a laptop, unless you bring your work environment, you have to go and set it up all over again, and that's very tedious, right?
Yep. But I would generally always rebuild the work environment for each version, because if you migrate the old work environment, then that work environment won't have any of the new functions kind of in the menu bars or in the interface. It's usually a good idea to rebuild it for each version.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
So I just want to have a go through kind of the interface a little bit. Like, I'm sure everyone's familiar with it, but just to kind of have a refresher. So, so we have the tab bar up here. We can turn this on and off if we want. From Archicad 23, I think we added this kind of launcher where we can go to any of the tabs that are currently open. So that was, I think, a 23 functionality. Also, or 24, I forget now. No, 23. So if you hover over the tabs, you also get little previews. We can turn this off. So this was kind of new functionality that got added to the tab bar quite recently. For pallets, you just grab on this little line kind of at the top of each of the pallets, and you just click and drag to drag it out. The easier way that I find is if you double click the header, it will dock it in, and if you double click that line, it will undock it to the previous location. So I find this double clicking of the header probably easier, to be honest, than to have to actually drag it in and out. Because sometimes on Windows, it can be a little bit tricky to kind of get where you need to drag it. For the toolbox here, obviously if we resize, then the names turn up, but if we resize it to just 2 column widths, then the names hide and we automatically see two rows of icons. But I'll show you how we can default to this rather than having the names, because if you drag a little bit further, it will go to the names again. So there's like a sweet spot where it will go to 2 columns. Down the bottom here, we have the quick options bar. Some users like this and some users prefer the quick options palette instead, but I will just keep the quick options bar at the moment. They have the same functionality. The only problem with the quick options bar is if your screen is a little bit small, some of the options can kind of get missed purely because they can't fit. So that's where the palette can actually come in quite handy. For small screens. And then we have toolbars up here, which we can drag kind of anywhere, and we're going to create our own custom toolbar with sort of show you a couple of features about this. And also the info box sits here. So I'm going to rearrange my environment a little bit and change some settings. So the first thing I'm going to do is drag out, So drag out the info box. And if we actually right click on the info box, we have an option to say the header is at the top or at the left. So normally it's on the left, but if we change the header to top, then that's easier to have a vertical info box. So if I resize the info box to be vertical, then when I choose, say, the wall, then now I have a vertically scrolling info box. So I'm going to dock this on the side next to my toolbox. So this is, I think usually you would get a lot more panels inside the info box when it's vertically docked. So I see quite a few users vertically dock the info box. And the other thing I can do if I right click is also hide the header texts. So you notice that all the panels have a little header like main, layer, geometry method, etc. So this is good for kind of new users, but once you start getting used to this, you can just hide, and that compacts the info box even more. So you can see more panels. So actually I don't need to scroll anymore because it fits these default panels. So that's the first thing. The next thing I'm going to do is modify the toolbox on the left here. So remember how, if I resize it, the names will appear, but I want to turn off all of these names. So what I'm going to do is right click on the toolbox and go into Toolbox. And this will take me directly to the work environment and the toolbox parts of the environment. I'm going to go through these in more details, but for now, I'm just going to modify this text. So here I can see all of the tools available, and you can see now all of the MEP is included by default, but they're off currently because I'm in the architectural workspace. So here on the left, on the right, we have the toolbox groups. So we have the select, design, viewpoints, and documents. And so these represents the groups here in the toolbox. So design, viewpoints, documents. So this is actually quite rearranged from version 23. I think I preferred this new version. So sometimes we had like the corner window in the more, and we had, basically the random things or the things that sort of didn't belong in other places, just in the more section. So now we've collated all of the documentation and stuff and modeling elements together. So I think it's more logically structured now. So within these toolbox groups, we have a couple of icons on the right-hand side here. We've got a little pin. Hopefully it's a bit small, but we have a pin and we have a text. So if we click the pin, then this is going to unpin, meaning that this will not be a fixed panel, that it will become a collapsible panel. Yeah. So I'm going to make sure that that's pinned. And then the next column basically has a little arrow and it has an ABC. So if you click this, it will cycle through the different states. So basically, if you just see the arrow, it means it will only show the icon and not the text as well. So for each of these groups, I'm going to switch this column so I just see the arrow to turn off the names. Yeah, it's a little bit small.
That's interesting. I didn't know this one.
So if I go OK, then I can resize this and it'll only show me icons.
Okay.
Yeah, so I find that quite useful.
Another thing we can do is, for example, just take out some tools. Let's say if you're just going to do some mass models and you want the basic tools only. Right? You don't want railing, or you don't want objects or voids or zones.
Yeah. Yeah, no especially like the MEP stuff. Like the MEP has like 50 different tools or something. So yeah, that's good that the MEP are not there by default.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay, so let's have a look at this dialog in a little bit more detail. So this work environment. So I'm accessing it. I can go through this kind of right click, but I'm just going to go options, work environment, and work environment. Okay, so we had a quick look at this toolbox item here, where we can actually create groups into this toolbox of the tools themselves. But let's go through kind of top down, and I'll kind of run through just some of the more critical, not critical, but some of the more maybe useful or interesting functions that we can do. So at the top level, we have basically our profile, and one profile will include multiple kind of sub or schemes inside that. So each of these groups have their own kind of schemes, and collecting all of those schemes together creates a work environment profile. So we can reuse, say, the shortcuts between multiple work environments that don't change. For example, here, so we only have one set of shortcuts. But for the user preference schemes, we also only have one. But for the command layout scheme, then we have multiple per discipline. And also the workspace. So this one stores basically the position of these panels and what's visible and what's not visible. So there's a little description down here just to say what is stored inside a workspace scheme. So you can see that because I've made some modifications, this has now gone to custom. So it's no longer linked to a stored scheme. And same here. Nope, not that one. Yeah, this one. Because we modified the toolbox, then this has now gone to custom. Okay, so let's kind of go top to bottom. So under our user preference schemes and our dialog boxes and palettes, there's a couple of useful items in here. For example, when you enter a value into a, for example, like the height of the wall, if you, after you finish typing and you just wait, after 1.5 seconds, it will be entered. So it's as if you press return on that cell. You can delay this. So it means that if you enter a value, you can make it longer. So sometimes I've made this like 2-3 seconds, just so it doesn't automatically get applied once you've entered it.
Yeah. So then then you have to wait longer for in case you.
Yeah, but if you just switch to another cell, then it will automatically do it. So this is more just if you're waiting on a cell, like you're just typing something, you're like, I'm not quite sure what to type, and it accepts it. And if this gets annoying, we can delay that that wait.
Yeah.
The other thing is the hide locked layers in pop-ups. So in the layers, so if I say hide, and if I go to then, so if I just go to my layers, I'm just going to select a whole bunch and go lock. And then you can see my list doesn't include any of the locked layers. So they're automatically filtered out of this list. I think I tend to prefer, like my preference is generally having it visible, because then you don't see things kind of jumping in the list. Like sometimes they're there and sometimes they're not. So I prefer, but it's all based on your preference. So now if I uncheck that one, now I can see all of my locked layers here. Okay. I won't go through all the others because this could take hours. So I'll just go through at least some of the kind of items. The selection and element information. For example, if you don't like the colors of like this blue of selection or the selection dots being black. I remember years ago, I used to make this red, and I think even Archicad, maybe a decade ago or more, used to have a different color. I think I feel like I remember, but I used to prefer red, but now I've just got used to black for the selection dots. And now if I change it to red, it now looks strange. The editable ones is purple. So we can change those colors, but again, if you do change them and someone tries to use your computer, they might, or you use somebody else's, you won't know what's what. So I generally prefer to kind of keep these pretty standard out of the box. Unless you're having like a hard of, like it's maybe colorblind, or like the eyesight's maybe not so good, maybe you can change the colors. Okay. So I'll go to the next one. So the tracker and coordinate input. I sometimes see, so if we turn off this custom appearance for the tracker, and we can also turn on and off what we want to show inside this tracker. So now yeah, so now you can see my tracker is kind of gray with a light gray background rather than the blue and the white, which is the default. Yeah. And also then the element info is kind of the gray as well. So I quite like that color. So that's kind of the option when you turn it off. But I think the default is the blue. Yeah. So when I turn this on, it will go back to here's the gray. Under the input constraints and guides. So here, when you're trying to connect sort of horizontally, vertically via the guides, snap guides, then we can kind of prefer whether we do use the horizontal, vertical, or parallel to grid. So if we have a grid that's angled, background grid, meaning not the grid elements, and also whether that's relative to the grid or relative to horizontal. So if we do have an angled grid as our background, then usually you would want to choose relative to grid and what the increment angle. So if you have like a 30 degrees versus 45, so it depends on kind of the project or your preference. This is also quite useful. So when you hover over an edge or a node, then after a second, it then turns like with a blue circle or a blue line. Sometimes users like this and sometimes they kind of don't like it or just want to use it instantly. So we have a delay on this. So if you think that it occurs too often, you can delay this. But to get it instantly, you just press the Q command. So I'll quickly show that. So if I hover over this line, then it turns blue. If I hover over a node, then it does that little circle. But if I want to wait longer, I can modify that setting to have that longer delay. But if I want it instantly, I just hover and then press Q and Q, and it will instantly appear to get those snap guides. So this is this one, the cursor snap. So when the cursor gets quite close to a point, then how many pixels kind of around that until you get the little check mark. The default is 5, but you can increase or decrease this if you want to sort of be more precise. Marcelo, you mentioned that like AutoCAD users like this one.
A lot of times they like to have like a bigger snapping area. Mm-hmm. So when you're close to a point that you want to connect, you know, a wall to another wall or something, if you want it to be have a bigger range or a bigger area for it to snap, you can put, let's say, 10 pixels. So it's easier for you to snap, but also that can make the
so here now
so see now, even though you're a bit away, you will already snap there. So if you click, you will snap to it.
So it's a bigger tolerance basically on points.
That's a good one.
So actually I think I put 20. Okay, 9 is the biggest. Okay, that's interesting. I guess so you don't put like 1,000 pixels.
Well, otherwise it becomes impractical to design, right?
Yes.
Maximum you can go is almost double the value, but I think it's still okay.
The drawing style, I think I've never seen really anyone do the Mac Classic like, so I'll skip that one. But the next one is quite useful, and because I'm on a Mac, I see more options. So if you're on a Windows machine, you will only see 2 options here, but I see 4. Because of the way that the scroll wheel of your mouse works. So if you want that to be panning, you can do this, but the default is always zoom. And if you want to pan, then you use the option or Alt or Option to change. Because I have a trackpad, and actually I very rarely use a mouse for Archicad, much to the amazement of Marcelo. So on Mac, we have a different control for the Magic Mouse and trackpad because it has a touch surface on top. So we have separate controls for that versus a mouse with a wheel. But only Mac users see this option, and I generally prefer the pan for the trackpad, and this generally works better for Mac OS than the zoom option. Okay, the model rebuild option, I will generally skip over this. You can kind of, I think, generally leave this alone. Only just the background updating, which you will see this little icon in the bottom right-hand corner next to the Graphisoft ID. You can also switch this here. Generally, the background updating is always enabled unless you are not plugged in, and then it will usually basically halt. So it'll stop updating to conserve power, which is then the second option is automatically enabled, or you can disable the background updating totally. I think there has been some cases where I've seen users that the background updating has been a little bit slow on their machine, and sometimes then it's advised to disable that background updating. But I've only seen this in kind of rare situations. The publisher, I will skip over. This is just for logs, so we don't need to deal with this at the moment. More options. Actually, it's funny that we call it more options. It's a little bit vague for me. So we can enable Archicad sounds. I usually would always recommend this to be off because it's like every time you move in 3D, it will always make this ding noise. So I would always keep this off. The only benefit of this, I think, is when you get a teamwork notification, it actually makes a little ding noise to indicate you've got a new message from teamwork. But otherwise, I would turn this off. Another one is when you double click in the navigator to open up a view, we can actually prefer to open those up in a separate tab. So not just, if there's a section open and I double click another section, it will replace the existing section that we have there. So it'll use an existing type tab, but we can open them in new tabs if we want to.
Yeah, just be aware that that might use more resources because you have two views open at the same time. So by default, we can have one type of view, right?
You can, sorry, say it again.
By default, we normally have one section open, one elevation open, one plan, so one view type at a time. This way, this allows us to open, let's say, 20 sections, but he also will, according to the project size, he might, drag make the file drag a bit more.
Yeah, usually this will just create too many tabs. So if I have these off, and currently I have a south elevation open, so if I go to my north elevation, because it's another elevation, it will basically use the existing elevation tab that was there. So it doesn't create a new one. We can open a new one by just right click and say open a new tab, but the default double click option will use an existing one.
Yeah.
So if I say open in new tab and OK, and then open up east elevation, it will create a new tab, south elevation, new tab. Yeah. But then your tabs get out of hand pretty quickly. And yeah, and it'll take more resources to have them open.
Yeah.
This one's quite useful, especially from 23 when we added the previews to the tab bar. So for me, I generally prefer having this off, but I think for newer users, this can be quite handy to see when I'm hovering over a tab, what the content of that tab is. So if we see just a generic kind of icon, it just means that I haven't been to that tab yet, so it hasn't cached the kind of view here. So if I open this tab and then switch back, and now that's cached as a little preview. So if we want to turn these off, for example, if we try to get to toolbars and they kind of get in the way a little bit, we can turn that off, that feature. So I'm going to turn this one off.
Yeah, that's useful when, let's say, you want to, instead of opening the whole 3D and it's a huge project, you just want to see which file you're working on, for example. If you have multiple files open, that's a good feature, I'd say.
Yeah. So now when I hover over, I don't get that little preview anymore. I can still access this kind of overview, but yeah. Okay, let's go back into the work environment. So let's go under here. We also have this experimental features. So a couple got added within 24. For example, the Python palette. So this is how we can access the Python palette for 24. I think it's here purely because it's a more advanced feature. So you kind of need to activate it first. Also on Mac, we have this new system appearance to allow dark mode. And so this will follow the Mac OS settings. And enable linked tabs. This is generally off by default, but if I enable this, so I'm going to say no thank you for now. Then what I can do is say pull the tab next to here. And if I remember how to, it's been a while since I use this. So link the floor plan with the north elevation. So if I link these two together by using this link tab with, it means that when I change any of my quick options settings down here, then it will affect all those that are linked. So the floor plan and the elevation will keep the same layer settings, the model view options, scale, etc. So this is off by default, but we can enable this to be able to have the same settings between multiple tabs. I think it's quite useful. So actually in version 19, I think when we introduced the tabs, we did it this way where we would remember that when we change the settings, it would change all of the tabs. But then we modified this so the tab remembers the settings. I think in 20, we remember the settings per tab. And so this kind of allows you to kind of use that older style method. Okay, so then advanced redraw options, I would generally not touch this. Sometimes if you're having some glitches and stuff, then we can have a look at modifying some of these settings, but generally I would leave them as they are. And let's then go to on-screen options. So there's a few items here which I think are quite useful. We don't need to worry about the energy evaluation and workspace colors for now. But a few of them is like show ghost bounding box of objects, columns, figures, and drawings. So let me just quickly show you this. So if this is on, actually some countries have this on by default. I think Germany prefers having this on. So now if I choose the column tool and just a regular column, you can actually, if I make this maybe bigger. Yeah, so now you can actually see the outline of this column before I place it. And if I go to my object tool and it's just the armchair, before I place this armchair, because it's locked. Okay. Okay. So now before I place this armchair, I will see a little silhouette, basically a bounding box of the object before I place. I think that can be quite handy, actually.
Yeah, I should like this one.
Yeah. So if it's
and you also see which point you're choosing as the insertion point.
Yeah, yeah.
So
you're not surprised after.
Yeah, normally I choose the second method for inserting the object so that I would have the box, but this one is new. I learned it now that we can use it like that. That's nice.
Yeah. So maybe this is something we'll consider for future versions if we enable this by default rather than having off. But okay, let's go back to the on-screen options. So that's the ghost bounding box. The other one I quite like is the show contours of favorites and library part previews. So if I open up the settings dialog here and go to my 3D view, you can see this preview doesn't show any contours, so it's purely just the surfaces. And you'll notice this also when I go to my favorites, then all these previews are basically just surfaces and no wireframe over the top. So with that option, so if I show the contours and go okay, and then open up my settings again, then now you can see they all have line work around them, including this preview here. Yeah. I think generally it's probably better if it's on for most users.
Yeah, because once we place it, we'll see it exactly as it will be placed.
Yeah, right? You see it with those lines, and you'll know that this has green and this has pink. Especially if the object is white, sometimes it can blend in with the background a little bit. So depending on if you're using titanium white, for example, then the lines really help to visualize. Okay. Okay, the other thing is use a uniform color for the master layout. So this generally, when you have a layout, then everything is red. So if I go to a layout and not place an object, okay, so you can see everything is red.
Yeah, whatever is on the master will be shown as red.
Yeah, so if I just turn this off, then I will see the actual colors from the master. We don't have this on by default, mostly because you think that you can select this, and it's not clear that this is not actually on this page, it's on a master. So this is why we usually choose red. So it's clear what's on the page versus the master.
Yeah, then with the other option is almost like you're seeing as a trace and reference type, right?
Yeah, yeah. So turn that back on, and now everything turns red, that one color. Okay, so let me go into the next parts. Okay, so we have, I actually will kind of skip over these ones quickly. So we can set the undo limit. I think default is 20. You can, I think, go up to 99 as the maximum. Yep, 99 is the maximum. So if you really think that you need to have 99 undos in a row, I think it does take up a little bit more processor because it has to save all of those steps, which is, I think, why we say 20. And yeah, I think it uses more memory. And the saving to recovery file, so this kind of autosave. So if it crashes, then you can recover. So I think default is extra safe, so every single step is stored. We can change this, but I would generally recommend to ultra safe.
Yeah.
Yes.
Normally is every single completed step. So if it crashes, halfway when you're trying to do something, then it will, that halfway is gone.
Yeah. For some users working a lot on hot links, so the data integrity here is quite useful. For example, the hot link updates, we can say ignore hot links. So this can actually speed up, because sometimes this checking the hot links can be a little bit slow, especially for like mega projects. So usually we would change this to say ignore. And this automatically check the status of the hot links. Usually we would turn this off as well. So when you open the dialog, it will do the check. And sometimes this can be quite slow, especially if you have lots and lots of hot links. So we usually would recommend to turn this off. But this is only in kind of large, I would say really large projects that you would need to modify these. I won't go through the network, and yeah, these are a little bit more advanced, so I'll skip through those. Keyboard shortcuts. If we want to, actually in 23 we added search, so this is really easy to find a command. But if I choose something like work environment and I want to assign a shortcut to this, so if I just hold down like a control key, like command, option, alt, control, and shift. So if I hold those down and a letter, then it will do a check within all of the, within my project to see if it's being used by anything. It will tell me that obviously Command W is close. If I go E, then it says it's used by rotate. If I go R, then that's redraw, T, tool settings. So if I go through and then I find one that's not being used, like Command I is not being used by another command, I can then hit assign. So now I can go assign. And if you want to see all of the lists, then here we have a shortcut to say show shortcuts in browser. So this will give you a whole table of all of your shortcuts. I generally wouldn't recommend to edit probably existing shortcuts, but I think adding them can be quite useful, because then you've got to remember, because if you use somebody else's computer, you don't want to be using your shortcuts, which could be something else on theirs. Okay, so now I can access this a bit easier by using Command I. So I've already went through Toolbox earlier. We can actually do something similar for tool settings, so the actual settings dialogues. So for example, the wall, we can turn on and off and rearrange these panels. Again, I wouldn't recommend really doing that. For example, we have this listing, which is off. This is kind of something that we consider as more legacy feature, or really pro or sort of advanced users, or kind of old school users that are kind of used to this. But I would always try to use the interactive scheduler, because it's more user friendly than this old listing. Pretty much it's just there for compatibility reasons. But if you do want to rearrange, you can. But I would generally keep these as is. Yep. The info box, we can do the same. So we can rearrange and turn on and off panels. So a lot of these panels are kind of duplicates of another panel. For example, we've got a floor plan and section panel, which has a pop-up with all of those settings, or we can show the individual panels that control something like the overhead line type or the cut line type. I think these are not necessary as panels because the floor plan and section does that already. So there's no reason to kind of turn these on. But I see some users, for example, they get the ID and the classification and ID and properties, they move these towards the top because they're super important. So rather than having them at the bottom, they move them pretty much at the top of the list. So they go through all of them and edit. So I've seen that a few times by users. Just so you don't have to scroll to get to the classification. Yeah. Workspace, I went through, and now let's have a look at kind of the toolbars and menus. So what I'm going to do is actually create a new toolbar that I don't have yet. So before I do that, I'll go through just a couple of the toolbars that we have. I'm just going to click OK on this. And here under toolbars, so these are some out of the box ones. A couple that I like tends to be the 3D visualization palette toolbar. So this is especially useful because it has things like, actually if I go to my 3D window, it'll make more sense. Okay, I think I need to dock it. Okay, there it is. Okay, so I'm just going to dock that up here. So for example, there's this one, which will change my camera to look perpendicular to a click surface. So if I click here, it's going to move my camera so that plane that I clicked on is now perpendicular to my camera. So I find that's one's quite useful. So I can say look perpendicular to that surface. And so it will basically move your model so that surface is perpendicular. And it has a lot of the other features as well, like 2-point perspective, opens up your rendering settings, your surface and surface painter, and your fly through and create sun steady. So all of those together. So
yeah,
I find
in case you're going to focus on visualization, this palette is very useful.
Yeah. The other one I tend to really like is the attributes one. To access all of your attributes directly just from one toolbar, so you don't have to go to options, element attributes, and go and find them. So having them all linked together here, I think is really good. And maybe the other one, I think the zoom one is also quite good. Actually,
I like the edit elements one also.
The edit elements, yeah, I think maybe zoom doesn't exist anymore. Okay. Edit elements. So all of your trim splits and
yeah. So it's for all the operations, all the transformation. You also can see these options under edit on the drop down menu. Yeah, it's pretty much almost everything we have here. So those people that are more AutoCAD oriented, that want to see the icons, you know, they use a lot the icons. These are quite useful.
Yeah, rather than going through or remembering the shortcuts.
Yeah, they even have the offset there, like offset the copy, and all these things.
Yeah, I guess the other palettes that's maybe worth mentioning, which is the coordinates and control box, which are a little more old school.
Yeah, they used to be on the bottom of the screen, these ones.
Yeah. It's interesting. They disappear when I change the. Maybe that's a bug. Yeah, control box. Yeah,
I think they're behind or something.
So yeah, maybe. So if I have, no.
You better dock them.
Yeah, because it hides.
I think they're there, but just behind.
Yeah, they disappeared. Okay, so undock that one. And the quick layers is also quite good.
Oh yeah. So I don't know if you're gonna cover that, but we can create our own, right? So you can.
Yeah, I was going to quickly create one. But I just want to show you one feature. Actually, if I remember how to
just
do it.
mention layers.
So if I make
offset.
Yeah, I don't remember how to. Yeah.
You said the distance, I think. Yeah, next one.
That one's
the fifth, that one.
So that one's disabled. Yeah, I don't use this palette too much.
I think spacebar, no?
Yeah, maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Can you try? Is that polyline? Can you try with line only?
Yeah, I think because I had multiple. Yeah. I think because I had multiple lines on top of each other.
Yeah, so now that's why I'm trying to connect.
Now if I say offset, then when I magic wand, I can then offset afterwards.
Yeah.
I don't tend to use this, so I've kind of forgotten a little bit how to use it.
But when people come from AutoCAD, I always show that when they keep asking, but I want to do an offset. How do I do an offset? So that's the option that allows us to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's create a toolbar. So I'm going to go into toolbars, and here I'm looking at all of the tool. There is a zoom. I just didn't see it before. So I'm going to go from this pop-up. I'm going to say new toolbar. I call this Archicad now. Okay. So now it's a blank toolbar. So now I can go through all of my lists, and there's a couple that are quite, I think, quite useful. So if I change this to all menus rather than just a command, so if I choose menus, and I need to remember what it is, so I'm going to look up, I think, profile. So if I use the apply profile, and I'm just going to add this, so it's a group. Yep. So I'm adding basically a folder to my toolbar. And I'm going to also add tools. So for example, architectural tools. So these are all of our tools like wall, beam, things like this, but I'm going to add the folder. So if I add that one, now I'm going to go to the commands. So rather than the menu, I'm just going to clear that search. And there's a couple of others that we've removed by default, but they're still there. So if I add boundary, yeah, so I can extract, subtract, add, so I can add all these four. So these are curtain wall. These used to be there, but since we added a lot more functionality with the curtain wall, with the boundary editing, we removed these from the default menu. But we can draw, say, a fill and have that fill extract from the boundary of a curtain wall. So maybe in another one, I can show you these a little bit more, but let's say add those. And what is something else I can open? Let's go edit. And if I go edit selected composite, so this is available in the context menu. So I can add that, for example, as well. And I can also, rename duplicate. If I cancel this right at the bottom, yeah, there's a separator, so I can add the separator, maybe move that there. So basically a separator like a line. So if I now go OK, And if I open up that toolbar, so the Archicad Now one, the one we just created, and here it is. So this is the one that just I created. So I'll place it maybe here. Just drag these others a little bit. Sorry, it just disappeared on me. Maybe it's the recording as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll make this just one line and then dock it here. So because we added apply profile, then this is actually all of my work environment profiles, which I can now switch to. So what I'm going to do is save this one, and then I'll switch between them.
Yeah, and there are multiple things we can save on the work environment profile. For example, shortcuts, or you didn't go through the keyboard shortcuts, right?
Just briefly.
Yeah. But imagine you guys want to use some shortcuts for I don't know, trim or offset or I don't know.
Yeah,
to
so
join.
Trim doesn't have anything applied to it, or join. Yeah, I think it's a unify, maybe. Yeah, that also doesn't have. So, and that's why.
You can add one.
Sorry?
Yeah, you could add your own there. So let's say you do.
Yeah, I applied to the work environment. I applied Command I. So because I checked the others on the top row, and they had other things attached to them.
Yeah, yeah, that's also another thing nice to show, that if you try, let's say you put Command T, right?
Yep. So it says tool settings.
Yeah, normally it's assigned to that one.
Yeah.
So if you assign anyway, the other one will be like thrown away.
Yeah. So it's good to use one that's not used yet. So I can apply, say, Command Shift I. Unfortunately, it's not like, so other programs have like 2 characters. So Archicad kind of needs a controller key and then a letter or a number to create a shortcut. So I know other programs, I think AutoCAD uses like 2 letters that you can type.
Yeah.
To create a shortcut. So now just Command I assign, this is assigned to the work environment. So now if I go Command I, it then opens up. Yeah. So we can use that actually to open up tools and things like that, or change tools.
Yeah, Robbie is saying that for him, he removes the command for the shortcuts. So he uses just a single, so E for rotation, D to drag.
So just draw. Yeah, so okay, I is not assigned to anything, so.
So if you put T, for example, for trimming, we check.
Yeah, so let's up trim, and then just go T, so top elevation.
Okay. Or TR, can we put two letters?
It can only be a single letter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we have to do like Shift T or something like that.
Shift T says it's also used for that, but so if I just cycle through the, U is not being used, but that's funny.
Yeah, but anyway. Well, top elevation is not something we normally use anyway.
Yeah, so let's go T, assign anyway. Okay, and so now I have basically some lines, and then go T, and
yeah. Well, you can also use just Control for that.
Yes, which is probably why it doesn't have a.
I know. RJ immediately put it up, saying the same thing.
Yes.
Actually, RJ also asked for something that, Robbie, it would be good to have a teamwork notification sound. instead of yelling reserve or send in the office.
It's merged with the other Archicad sounds, so it would be good if it could be separated, because I find the Archicad sound like no one should turn it on.
Yeah.
Because it'll get really irritating very quickly. So now that I have this one saved, I can then switch back to my Archicad, the regular profile. So now it's back, and you can see that all, the link tabs got changed, and okay, also my palette got turned off. Toolbar. Yeah, because it's only stored in my other. So now I have to apply the Archicad now. Oops. And then that should bring back my, I find sometimes the toolbars, yeah, I find that on Mac. I don't know if anybody else has had that problem, but sometimes the toolbars disappear for me. Yeah, so for me, the toolbars, yeah, so it's still there. It's just some reason they hide. I think it might be to do with the show main palettes only or something, or hide the palettes and toolbars option that we also have. And here, so I could actually turn off my toolbox here and just have a list or one menu of just all of my tools. Actually, I've seen one guy in the US who turned off the Archicad tools and purely has all of their tools in a pop-up. So.
But that's 2 clicks, so depends.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny because he just wanted to save a few pixels, basically.
Yeah. Well, it depends.
Okay.
I can imagine if you have a 13-inch screen or 11.
Yes.
Then yes.
Yeah. So now I have this option to open up the settings. So yeah. I think this is pretty good. Maybe the downside is that like these toolbars are all stored in one work environment. So to be able to transfer a toolbar between work environments or between, you have to basically export this whole scheme. So there's no way to just export one kind of toolbar. You have to export the scheme of the toolbars.
It's doable to create like your own customizable. Let's say the standard that we have on top might have, half of the icons there that we don't want to use. For example, the eyedropper and the inject, so the get properties and inject properties. I use Alt and Control Alt, right? So probably I don't need it there.
And probably the undo redo you don't need.
Yeah. So yeah, with this we can, optimize the rental of the screen, because all the space that we have in the screen is very useful for us to put on the design. Or as RJ says, just get a second screen.
Yes.
It's also a good option. Actually, then you can throw everything to the second screen, the navigator, the palettes, your WhatsApp, everything just goes into the second.
I've seen that too, where they just have a huge working area and then they just have a screen full of palettes that are just next to each other on the other one. The other thing that's good on Mac is you can undock tabs. This is a Mac only feature, so you can technically put yeah, I think it's having problems with the display order.
Yeah, it's sending it behind.
Yeah.
So yeah, now you have to. So actually, Zarzar just asked for that. Is there any tool to fit 2 views in one window? So you want to see the 3D and the floor plan view. So basically, what you have to do is you have to undock. I think Windows can also do this, right? It's just that it's
Windows can only unmaximize, but you can within the frame of Archicad you can put 2 things next to each other, but it still has to be.
So that's the thing. So that's what Zarzar wants. So if you click on the bottom to maximize or minimize, not minimize, unmaximize, is that how we call it?
Unmaximize, yeah.
Yeah. If we click on that button, it will allow you to show more than one view next to each other.
Yeah. I think on Mac it's better, but the window management on Mac is very different to the window management on Windows. So this is kind of an OS difference, not necessarily an Archicad difference. Well, it is, but I mean, it's kind of embedded into the operating system more.
Yeah, and one thing RJ is asking if you will update concurrently. No, it will only update when we click on that view.
Yeah,
so
correct.
If you have a 3D and a floor plan, if you're changing on the floor plan, when you look at the 3D, until you click on it, it will not update.
Yeah. So if I undock.
This works well with 2 screens, I think I've seen that.
Yeah, it's not so good on one.
I've seen a lot of users using it like that. Yeah, I think unfortunately it's a bit annoying that it doesn't work like that. But
yeah, because this technically window should be in front of the other window, but I'm not sure if that's a Catalina problem or.
I think because you're sharing screen, this
or that. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you do a change now in the plan, let's say you delete a few walls there.
Yeah. So if I delete these two, this
it
one
doesn't delete.
It doesn't change. But if I click on this window, then it deletes. Yeah. So it only updates on when it becomes active. And I think we do this mainly for performance reasons. So otherwise, Archicad would be slower.
Yeah.
Because it would have to generate all of those hidden windows.
Yeah, otherwise, whatever windows you had open on the palette, it will have to keep updating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we pretty much went through everyone's questions. Notification sound. Remove the command. Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing that I mentioned at the beginning is the migration, that you basically have to rebuild it per version. So when you migrate, you basically have to recreate your work environment. So it's not so easy to automatically migrate. So it's better to do it manually, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I try to keep things maybe more out of the box and only kind of change the things that you really need to change.
Yeah, yeah, quite good. I think it was quite useful. I think for those people who like to customize their work environment, or even for, you know, if you're a BIM manager and you want to say, okay, let's reduce the noise and put just whatever is important for, let's say, the project directors or for the users. I want them always to use the, you know, the palette for the layers, or I want them to use, or if someone is a rendering expert and wants to have the rendering palette or the visualization palette always on.
So we can do that with just kind of like hide and show palettes.
Yeah.
So if you're presenting, then you can also just use this hide palettes and show palettes.
Yeah, quite nice.
Yeah. Okay, so I can wrap up.
Yep.
Yeah, I think so.
No, we went through them during your presentation.
Oh, that's good. Good.
Yeah. So anyone with more questions, guys, this is the time.
Yeah, I probably need to restart my computer at some point. Okay.
Clay wants a copy of this webinar. Sure, it will be available on YouTube. So that's actually part of his wrapping up. So.
Yep.
Well, I'll pass you on to that.
Okay, let me see if this works. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can, again, follow us. So we don't have the link for the YouTube, but that's on the next slide. So on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And also on our YouTube channel. So we upload all of these onto this channel. So if you just search for GRAPHISOFT SG, then you'll find all the previous ones. Also, there was a webinar a week or so ago, last week, computational BIM. So Marcelo, you helped on this as well. So even we've uploaded this yesterday. Yep.
Yeah, that's
and
quite heavy topic, but it's very worth it to go through it because we cover a lot of ground.
Yeah, so that's also worth going through.
Yeah.
And we have some training courses. So we've put up our September training for basic, advanced documentation and modeling. So you can sign up for those at the graphisoft.com/sg/courses link. I should have a QR code. Yep. And we have our Archicad 24, so Experience Archicad 24 launch this Thursday. So it's only like 2 days away. So if you haven't registered yet, you can still get in, I think. But I think they will close sort of end of tomorrow, maybe the registrations. We'll see.
Yeah. So yeah, just sign up because we're almost full house. And we will have the pleasure to have Ian Lander and Catherine presenting also. So,
yep. So that Ian and Catherine joining us.
Yeah. So she always has an amazing message, and this Thursday we know that it won't disappoint you guys.
Yeah. So it'll run from 3:30 on Thursday until around 5. But
if you mentioned we're giving away an iPad.
And an iPad, yes, I think RJ remembers this.
Yeah, iPad Pro.
iPad Pro, yes.
The expensive one.
Yeah, not the basic one.
Yeah.
So just make sure that you registered for this. And that wraps up today's session. So the next one is just a thank you slide. Yeah,
thank you very much, guys. Looking forward to see you next week, if not this Thursday. Next week, as James mentioned, we'll have Ezra Architects, and Kiwa always presents amazing designs. So cool. Stay tuned because it will be definitely worth it. Okay.
Great. Yeah, so thanks everybody.
Yeah. Take care. See you next week.
Bye.
Stay safe. Bye. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.